Brendan Dassey, Trial Transcript, Day 8, April 24th, 2007. Reconvened at 8:32 a.m. The Court. Good morning, Counsel. This is State of Wisconsin versus Brendan R. Dassey, 06 CF 88. Appearances, please. Attorney Kratz. The State continues in its appearance by Special Prosecutors Ken Kratz, Tom Fallon, and Norm Gahn. Attorney Freeman. Attorney Mark Freeman, Attorney Ray Edelstein appear with Brendan Dassey in person. The Court. Are you set to proceed? Yes, Judge. Do so. Attorney Freeman. Call Dr. Robert Gordon. Dr. Robert Gordon, called as a witness herein, having been first duly sworn, was examined and testified as follows. The clerk. Please be seated. Please state your name and spell your last name for the record. The witness. Could I get prepared first, please? The clerk. Sure. The witness. My name is Robert H. Gordon, Gordon. Direct examination by Attorney Freeman. Doctor, can you describe what your educational background is? Sure. I have a bachelor's degree from Purdue University that was obtained in 1972. I received my doctorate in clinical psychology from Washington University in 1976. I completed a one-year internship at the University of Tennessee School for Health Sciences. And I subsequently audited 2 classes in the early 80s at the University of Wisconsin Law School. I've attended a variety of workshops in the meantime, and likewise have given oral presentations, seminars, and training. Then I've gone to workshops. Where are you currently employed? Until Friday, I'm currently employed with Forensic Psych Associates. Its main office is in Janesville. Other offices are located in Chicago, Milwaukee, and Rockford. And you said until Friday. Are you changing positions as of Friday? I am. And where will you be working at that point? As of Tuesday, May 1, I will be the Director of Forensic Evaluation Services at St. Louis Behavioral Medicine Institute Health, St. Louis Behavioral Health Institute, affiliated with St. Louis University. What other work or employment history do you have involved with clinical or forensic psychology? Well, I began my career primarily as a clinical psychologist. I worked for the first 2 years after I completed my graduate degree at the Janesville Counseling Center that's what is currently known as, it's a part of the Rock County Healthcare Center system, county system, and I was a clinical supervisor there. And then from 1978 until present, I have been in private practice, running my own office, employing some staff, and doing counseling, consulting to different agencies, probation and parole, counseling, other counseling services, Department of Human Services, etc. And then over the past 5 years, I've exclusively limited my practice to forensic work, except I do a few free counseling sessions and run a free group at a church, and I will continue that on a one-time per week or one-time per month basis by phone once I get to St. Louis, but with everyone else in a church in a group. Are you a member of any professional organizations or associations? I am. Can you describe those organizations related to your field of expertise? Well, they're listed on my CV, and they include the American Psychological Association, of which I'm a member. I was designated, maybe 20 years ago, as being a fellow of the Wisconsin Psychological Association. I'm also a member of the division of Wisconsin Psychological Association called the Society of Clinical and Consulting Psychologists. Then there's the division of the American Psychological Association, of which I'm a member of the American Psychology Law Society. I'm also a member of 3 smaller organizations: the Association for the Treatment of Sex Abusers, the Illinois Sex Offender Management Board, and the Milwaukee Area Psychological Association. I'm sorry for reading, but I want to make sure it's accurate. You mentioned that this is on your CV. That's correct. And CV, you mean by that curriculum vitae? Precisely. Another word for resume? Yes, sir. Exhibit number 226, marked for identification. I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 226. Is that the curriculum vitae you're referencing? Yes. Now, you had mentioned, or I think you were going into discussing certain boards, and I think you mentioned up until recently. Can you describe, first of all, what boards and what you mean by up until recently? Yes, I was on 3 boards and resigned due to my changing position. The boards include, in the past, being on the advisory committee to the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater Chancellor, the Dean of Arts and Sciences. I also was on the Circle of Friends for the Court, appointed special advocate in Rock County. I also in the past was on the board of directors for the Society of Clinical and Consulting Psychologists that I referred to already. There may have been one or two others. I didn't check my notes. I'm sure I omitted one. Now, you've mentioned clinical psychology along with the term forensic psychology. Can you describe what the difference is between the two? Sure, there are many components of psychology, whether it's clinical psychology, experimental psychology, industrial psychology. There are different specific aspects of psychology. But when you apply that body of knowledge to matters that come before the court to assist the court or a jury in making decisions, that's when it becomes forensic in nature. So that you can have a forensic social psychologist or forensic engineer. Forensic means a body of knowledge that qualifies you by the court to be an expert, to offer any information to the court and to the jurors. How long have you been involved in forensic psychology, for instance? I've been involved in forensic psychology since 1978, but it's been on an increasing basis since that time. I began by doing mental commitment evaluations and guardianship evaluations. Have you ever testified in court before? Yes. Can you recall how many times you've been in court as testifying in this type of capacity? Mr. Freeman, I came to a better estimate of that, and it's an estimate last night as I calculated it, and that would be roughly 2,500. But that number is inflated because many of those have been done at the request of the Department of Probation and Parole, where I consult, or I consulted up until this past Thursday. And also those numbers are higher because the significant portion also are mental commitment evaluations and guardianship evaluations. So it's not necessarily jury trials, for instance. No, sir, the majority are not jury trials. The majority are before the judge. So just a judge is what you're saying? I wouldn't say just the judge. I'd say before the judge, before the court. Yes. Have you authored or co-authored any publications or any articles or any books? Yes. You, again, briefly described the topic of the publication. Could I briefly describe what that authored publication is? I co-authored one book called Substance Abuse, Homicide, and Violent Behavior. I have also self-published a facilitator's guide and a learner's workbook regarding treatment of sex offenders. Then I have a number of articles that have been published. Some have been published in what's called peer-reviewed journals, where you submit it to psychologists and other mental health professionals, and they decide whether it's worthy of publication. In other occasions, some of the 12 articles that I've written have been in more like trade journals, like put out by the different, like a bar association or a psychology association. And those would not be called peer reviews. Those are reviewed by editors of the journals or trade publications. Have any of those peer review publications involved aspects of forensic psychology? One did indirectly. And what was that? Well, that was my dissertation, and I didn't foresee it as being forensically related, but it is, and it's entitled Diagnostic Compliance in Rorschach Interpretation as a Function of Group Member Status. That was my dissertation to get my PhD, and also I summarized it better than I did the title to be published in a peer-related article. How often do you spend time familiarizing yourself with the current research in the field of forensic psychology? Well, my wife thinks that I do that quite often and that she's right. I receive journals, I review journals, I go to particular workshops and seminars, and I also, thanks to the modern day technology, probably spend an average of 1 to 2 hours in the evening, 4 days a week on the average, seeing what current articles are published in a variety of areas regarding forensic cases in general or cases that I'm consulting on. Why is it important to continue to follow the research or follow trends in forensic psychology? Well, it's 2 reasons. One is ethically required by the ethical codes that I subscribe to or ascribe to simply by my participation in these organizations I've mentioned. The other reason is more important to me. It's personal. When I'm offering information that may be helpful to judges or juries that affect life, liberty, finances, people's rights, then that's something that I personally take very seriously. Have you ever presented or trained? You mentioned you've gone to training sessions. Have you ever trained others in your field of psychology? I have. Can you briefly describe those presentations or trainings? Well, they've been on a variety of forensic topics. I could enumerate those if you like, but I can summarize by saying that I counted them up, and there are 100 or give or take a couple hundred presentations that I've provided to either attorneys, and they've been continuing legal education approved for all, And I've also presented to probation officers, social workers, federal probation chiefs regarding a variety of forensic matters. Some of them have been small, only 10, 15, 20 individuals at a bar association. Others have been large. When it's been, for example, most recently I testified, not testified, but spoke at regarding sexual assault, homicide, and capital cases in Texas at a national conference. So it runs the gamut. Previously, you indicated you've testified over approximately 2,500 times in various types of proceedings. When you've testified in the past, do you testify solely for one side or the other? No, sir. Do you have any percentage as to how often you're called by one side or the other? Pardon me? Do you have any percentage that you're aware of as far as how often you're called by, let's say, for instance, the defense? That's a different question than you asked before. By the defense, probably 60%, by the prosecution, probably 40%, but that's still the minority of who request my services. Now, let me just skip ahead. Are you familiar with the term, quote, false confession, unquote? Yes. And how is this term familiar to you as a forensic psychologist? Well, it's familiar to me by cases I've been involved in, by my understanding of the literature and the tests available to evaluate them, and it's related to evaluating whether, or it's related to helping address false confessions, and which are admitting to wrongdoing when it didn't exist, or overstating one's involvement in a crime. And is there another term that's used in this field? Well, beginning in 1908, there was Munsterberg, who wrote his first book on causes of false confession at the turn of the century. Also not this century, Binet showed pictures and then saw if there was a change in responses when the pictures were shown again. And most recently in the 1980s, Giesely, and I've been told it's Gudjonsson, developed what's called interrogative suggestibility. And that was in the 80s. And he has done extensive research and come up with a Gudjonsson suggestibility scales to assess for two aspects of interrogative suggestibility. Is Gudjonsson the foremost expert in this field? He's certainly one of the leading experts. He was originally a detective in Iceland. He went over to London. He became a psychologist. He was asked to consult about confessions. He now is the professor of forensic psychology at the Institute of Psychology at King's College in London. He's written I didn't bring it with me, a thick handbook, which, not to be blasphemous, but would be the Bible of the psychology of false confessions and psychology of false confessions. I don't have the exact title with me, but it's one that's heavily relied upon. Is the Gudjonsson scale of suggestibility, what you've just recently described, the only tool that a forensic psychologist has available to him in determining whether a person has the psychiatric or psychological characteristics that may cause him to be vulnerable to give any false confession? No. What other tools do you believe as a forensic psychologist are important to consider in making a determination of suggestibility? Focusing on tools as your Attorney Kratz, Judge, I'm sorry, if I may interpose an objection, perhaps Mr. Freeman is doing this intentionally, but he's interposing the terms suggestibility and false confession. If we're talking about false confession, I'd ask that he ask that question. If he's talking about suggestibility, I'd ask that he phrase it in those terms. The court. So you're objecting to the form of the question as a compound question? Attorney Kratz, I am, Judge. They are two, I think, distinct concepts, and I'd ask that those be referenced to any specific questions. Thank you. The court. Mr. Freeman? Attorney Freeman. The court. Okay. Attorney Freeman. Rephrase. Can you describe the other tools that you would consider important in making a determination whether a person has those personality or psychological characteristics that make them vulnerable to suggestion? Yes, generally speaking, there are tests regarding intellectual functioning, IQ. They could be memory. They could be tests associated with assessing personality traits, characteristics associated with the likelihood of being suggestible. Those are the main ones. Now, are these the main categories? I'm sorry, are these tests developed solely to determine whether a person may be suggestible? The only one that was solely developed that personal is the Gudjonsson suggestibility scales. So the other tests that you were just talking about in a more of a generic form, are they used in other evaluations in forensic psychology, for instance? In forensic psychology and non-forensic psychology, true. Why is it that these tests have that potentially nothing to do with suggestibility are important tools to consider as a forensic psychologist in making that determination?